Hi, everyone, and welcome to a presentation on all models are wrong, some models are useful. To explain a little bit more about the choice of title, the title is actually based on a well-known quote by famous statistician George Box. And the idea is something as follows. So models are only approximations or idealizations, perhaps another word, of some phenomena that we see in reality. So in our case, we're of course interested in things happening in the markets. And in this sense, these models are never correct. To maybe just give a very quick analogy, consider this building, which of course exists in reality, thinking about this puddle as a visual metaphor for models. We can see that some parts of the building is missing. The building is upside down, and there may be visual distortions due to wind and water effects. So as such, this reflection in the puddle has some inaccuracies when it comes to the actual building that exists in reality. But despite this reflection is still highly useful to us. We can still determine that it is a building that we're looking at, for one. And to include other aspects, we may perform useful measurements on this picture that could give us vital key information about the actual object, the building, that exists in reality. And so models function in a very similar sense to this metaphor. So this presentation is heavily based on the research paper, Best Practices in Research for Quantitative Equity Strategies by Cerniglia, Fabozzi, and Kolm. It's a great paper. If you have time, definitely read it. So this presentation will be divided as follows. I will start by talking a bit more about models in the real world. And then from the paper, I will provide 9 tips for better model development. And as the last topic, I will discuss what quantitative models mean for different approaches to investing, being a quantitative approach or a fundamental approach. I'll then end this video with my conclusion and references. So models and the real world. So as discussed in the beginning of this presentation, models are approximations or idealizations of some aspect of the real world. And in our case, we're of course interested in the markets. As such, they describe only the most salient features of markets. And it is important to note that not every market dynamic is included in the model. So if you think back to the picture of the building that we had, there are parts, of course, missing from the building and details. And best practices involve understanding how to make better decisions in the research design process, which is something we'll discuss a little bit in the next few slides. Now, when it comes to building these models, there's 2 ways of thinking or approaching it. It is hypothesis or deductive based, or pattern or inductive based. So let's start with hypothesis based. The starting point is some insight about a trading opportunity that exists. And this will depend on the economic thesis on how the market works or why the opportunity exists. Typically, this part precedes the actual empirical work. In contrast, for the pattern-based approach, this is exploratory in nature, and the discovery of insight emerges from the actual empirical work. Key feature, learning occurs throughout the process, and in this case, it is very important to distinguish between correlation and causation. So let's talk about some tips for better model development, and in particular, trying to answer some of the question, how do we make better decisions in the development of quantitative strategies? So point 1, start a research project with scientific caution. Point 2, understand your assumptions. So the assumptions underlying the research methodology decisions and why those assumptions were chosen should always be questioned and understood. Formulate an alternative hypothesis. Point 4, make key changes to your assumptions to evaluate their robustness. So point number 5, look for contrary evidence of the findings. Try to approach things with an attitude of trying to disprove yourself. Point 6, tweak the research question being asked and try answering this revised question as a way of gaining additional perspective. Point number 7, focus on causation and probabilities rather than statistical correlations. Point 8, break down the investment thesis into its underlying assumptions and scrutinize each assumption. And then finally, point 9, examine what you know about the investment thesis from what you do not know or cannot know. So what do quantitative models mean for different investors? So I'll make a few brief comments here. For a quantitative investor, model forecasts produce an expected return forecast on a security or a set of securities. And for a fundamental investor, model forecasts create new insights to synthesize with other qualitative information. So, for example, management meetings and industry strategy, these being acquired to make investment decisions. So an important thing emphasized in the paper is the key to the winner's success is being able to synthesize information from multiple sources while recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of each approach. So in this video, we had a quick discussion about some ideas behind model development, starting with some ideas about models in the real world, that models are only approximations or idealizations of some aspect of the real world, in this case, relating to the markets. We then gave 9 tips for better model development, as discussed in the paper that I mentioned. And finally, we gave a few brief points on quantitative models for different investors. What does it mean if you're a quantitative investor, and what does it mean if you're a fundamental investor? So as I mentioned, this presentation is heavily based on this paper. If you're interested in knowing more, I highly encourage you to look it up and to read it. So thank you for your time. And if you're interested in more of this type of content or other quant-related content, please visit our YouTube channel and remember to subscribe. Thank you.